GoForThe2.com in with the Week 3 college football predictions. We started slow in the early part of the afternoon, finished on a positive note, winning 4 of the last 5 at night, and more importantly, 4-0 in the top 25 ball games. We now turn our attention to week number 3. Not a very impressive slate, but from top to bottom, some solid games. Let's start. For me, it starts on Thursday night. New Mexico and Bob Davie on the road in Boise to face Boise State, coming off a disappointing 47-44 loss to Washington State. They led that game in the fourth quarter, 31-10, before Washington State had a fourth quarter comeback and won it in overtime, 47-44. New Mexico, a disappointing 30-28 loss at the hands of arch rival New Mexico State. You look at Bob Davie and this offense this year, a more balanced offense. They're rushing for 217 on the ground, passing for 238 this season. Compared to last year, they had the number 1 ranked rushing offense, pounding the rock for 350 yards per game, while only passing for 106 yards through the air last year. This is a more balanced offense. They have some inconsistency, but I think they get back on track on the road in their first conference game of the year. I'm not sold on Boise State this year. They've played very well against the run against Troy and Washington State, only allowing right around the area of 60 rushing yards to both of those teams per game. They now face a blue-collar offense in New Mexico. I think Bob Davie with Lamar Jordan gets back to basics. He's a mobile quarterback. Look for Bob Davie to have a solid defensive game plan in place. I'm still not sold on the physicality of Boise State. New Mexico is my pick to win their half of the division in the Mountain West Conference. I'm not backing down now. I think they'll be prepared for this ball game. And more importantly, look for them to run the football at will on a suspect defensive front 7 in Boise State. They'll slow down the tempo, and I think they get the 38-31 victory on the road in Boise. Another intriguing battle is Missouri and Purdue. Purdue looked very good last week at home against MAC opponent in Ohio. They won that ball game by 20 points over the Bobcats, 44-24. Jeff Brom has this offense playing very, very well. When you look at both of their games in the loss to Louisville and Ohio, offensively, they've been able to move the football. They're rushing the football for 150 yards on the ground compared to last year, where they only rushed for 96 yards per game. It was one of the worst statistical rushing offenses in college football. They now have more balance, but now face a speed team in Missouri. Keep in mind, this Purdue offense is only converting 36% on third downs. They're going up against a speed team now in Missouri that did not look good last week, 31-13. They lost that matchup at home to Will Muschamp in South Carolina. They held a 10-0 second quarter lead against Jake Bentley and let that lead slip away. They lost that ball game by double digits, 31-13. But I think Missouri has a speed advantage, a significant speed advantage. Their offense going up against a slower Purdue defensive front 7. When you look at Purdue last year, they were 1-8 in conference play. They allowed 238 rushing yards per game, but they haven't faced an offense yet that I think will stretch them vertically. Yes, they face Louisville, but Louisville is more of a one-dimensional offense with quarterback Lamar Jordan. This is a more balanced offense with running back Demaria Crockett, Jamar Moore at the wide receiver position, and Drew Lock. Drew Lock looked a little inconsistent last week. He's still only completing 53% of his passes, but this is a Missouri offense that's averaging 383 passing yards per game. They're rushing for 236 yards on the ground, but more importantly, I think they have a significant advantage going up against a slower Purdue secondary. To me, that's the difference. They're converting around 50% of their third down conversions as well. That's a key element entering this ball game. They're playing at home, and look for Missouri to get a convincing 20-point victory over Purdue. I think it's in the area of 48-28. Missouri dominates this matchup. Let's stay in the SEC. Intriguing ball game between Kansas State and Vanderbilt. You look at Kansas State last year, they were 9-4, 8 wins, came against FBS opponents with a combined overall record of 39-60. This was not a good team against the better teams on their schedule. I think when you look at this team overall, a one-dimensional offense around quarterback Jesse Ertz. They now go on the road to face a very blue-collar SEC defense in Vanderbilt. This is a defense in Vanderbilt that, to me, matches up very well against the Kansas State offense. More importantly, you look at Vanderbilt's offense. Last year in 2016, Vanderbilt only had 9 passing touchdowns last year. Through 2 games now, Vanderbilt has 7 passing touchdowns, no interceptions. Kyle Shermer has looked very well. And more importantly, Vanderbilt does have a solid offensive line that I think can wear down Kansas State's defensive front 7. Look for Ralph Webb and look for Blasingame to break out in this matchup. This is a big game for Vanderbilt. Derek Mason's a defensive-minded coach. I think he'll have a solid game plan in place, and it is SEC speed, to me, that is the difference. I'm still not sold on Kansas State. I like Vanderbilt to get the upset victory, 28-24 over Kansas State in this ball game. I think Kyle Shermer will be able to work off of play action. I look for Vanderbilt to create some turnovers over Jesse Ertz, put him in third down and long situations. And for me, I think that's the difference. Vanderbilt strikes the 4-point upset over Bill Snyder and the crew this coming weekend. Another intriguing battle is Ohio State and Army. Ohio State lost that matchup 31-16. I liked Oklahoma. They put up 490 total yards of offense against that Buckeyes defense. They rushed for 106 yards on the ground, right around 386 yards through the air. You look at Ohio State's defense now. This is an Ohio State secondary that's allowed over 400 passing yards per game. The last 2 games, they're right in the area of 400 yards per game. They now go up against a triple option offense in Army. Army's averaging 417 rushing yards on the ground. I think a lot of people are just expecting Urban Meyer and Ohio State to bounce back in this ballgame. But let's be honest, it's Army. I don't expect Ohio State to be into this ballgame. It's not even a Big Ten opponent. More importantly, they're going to have to be patient both offensively and defensively in this ballgame going up against a triple option. Army, to me, will slow down the tempo. They'll force an ugly game against Ohio State. And to me, that's the difference. You look at this Ohio State offense. Last week, J.T. Barrett was very inconsistent. Only 183 passing yards per game. Yes, this is a solid defensive front 7. Holding opposing offenses under 100 yards rushing the last 2 games on average. They allowed 106 to Oklahoma, under 100 to Indiana, but they're going to have to be very disciplined in terms of gap integrity, not to be overly aggressive running sideline to sideline, because I think misdirection could catch Ohio State off guard in this ballgame. I think Army can run the football and keep J.T. Barrett on the sidelines, limited possessions. Ohio State wins, but I think this game is very, very close by Ohio State standards. The Buckeyes eke out a 17-point victory over the Cadets this coming Saturday. I don't expect Ohio State to be, from a fan perspective, into this ballgame either. I expect a very lackluster crowd within the horseshoe as well. Another intriguing battle, Oregon and Wyoming. Oregon jumped out to a 42-14 lead over Nebraska before holding on 42-35. I'm still not sold on this Oregon defense. They've played much better in run support in recent weeks, but now they go on the road to Josh Allen and Wyoming. Wyoming still not running the football like they were last year. They're only averaging 62 rushing yards per game. But I believe Oregon got worn down in that matchup. They expended a lot of energy against Nebraska, did not score a second half point in that ballgame from an offensive perspective. So Nebraska was able to make adjustments defensively. Think that could be a game film that Wyoming could utilize in this matchup. And more importantly, Josh Allen is a legitimate quarterback. I think he could challenge that Oregon secondary vertically. Laramie is a very difficult place to play. I expect the Cowboys to be into this matchup. And I think Wyoming gets the upset victory, 42-35 over Oregon. Wyoming wins this ball game. I expect them to run the football as well. Even though Oregon's much better in run support, Wyoming strikes the upset over Oregon on the road. Look for them to jump out early and put the pressure on Justin Herbert to match them score for score. To me, that's the difference in this ball game. Another intriguing battle is Clemson and Louisville. Clemson dominated last week 14-6 over Auburn, 11 sacks. They held Auburn's offense to 36% on third down conversions. They now go on the road against Louisville. They're 3-0 over the Cardinal over the last 3 years and have won those ball games by 5 points per game. This is a Clemson offense that's converting 53% of their third down conversions, holding opposing offenses to 30% on third down conversions. To me, I think that's the difference. They're a balanced offense. I look at that secondary led by defensive coordinator Brett Venables that can mix up coverages and force Lamar Jackson to read coverage. I think that's the matchup you want to see play out. Still not sold on Louisville's defense, even though they've played lights out last couple of weeks. This is a speed team in Clemson. Kelly Bryant's looked very well, especially in making solid decisions. I look for those wide receivers at Clemson to stretch Louisville's defense vertically. It's not going to be easy, and do not expect Clemson to get 11 sacks this coming weekend, but I expect them to keep Lamar Jackson in the pocket and force him to make his reads and progressions, and to me, that's the difference. I think Clemson strikes a 13-point victory over Lamar Jackson this coming weekend. I think the speed of Clemson as well offensively challenges that Louisville defense on the perimeter. Guys like Feaster, guys like Fuller, look for Ray McLeod, Hunter Renfrow, Deion Kane to have big days, and I look for Clemson to exploit that defense of Louisville in this matchup. Convincing 13-point victory by the Clemson Tigers on the road. To me, they're the best team in the ACC. I picked them at the start of the year. I'm not backing down now. Clemson gets a double-digit victory over Lamar Jackson this coming weekend. Here's another game that's very intriguing. It's Stanford on the road against San Diego State. These teams haven't played since 1988. When you look at this matchup overall, I mean, Stanford allowed over 300 rushing yards to USC. They got dominated, allowing over 600 total yards of offense. We picked USC. We thought they had a significant speed advantage over Stanford. I was not sold on Stanford at the start of the year. They were 10-3 last year. To reiterate, 4-3 after their first 7 games last year. Those opponents were a combined 57-34. In the last 6 games of 2016, you're talking about a Stanford team that was 6-0 against opponents with a combined overall record of 27-46. When you look at Stanford in their 3 losses in 2016 to Washington State, and Colorado, they failed to rush for over 100. They're going up against a San Diego State defense that's only allowing around 50 rushing yards per game. Rocky Long's a blue-collar coach. This is an offense that's averaging in San Diego State 277 rushing yards on the ground. I wasn't sold on their offensive line, but they still have a physicality on the offensive and defensive lines. They're playing a Pac-12 opponent. It's back-to-back road games for Stanford. This is not an easy game, and I'm still not sold on the Cardinal being an elite team. I don't expect them to bounce back. I expect San Diego State with Rashad Penny to wear down this Cardinal front 7, and I'm calling for the upset. I think 37-34, San Diego State gets the upset at home